It's been 3 years since Blackwood Creek, and the smell of damp earth and decay still clings to me, a phantom scent that no amount of scrubbing or fresh air can erase. They called it a ghost town, a relic of forgotten industry nestled deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains. We went in expecting shadows and echoes, maybe a few jump scares for the greenhorns. What we found was something far older, far hungrier, and infinitely more patient than any mere ghost. I'm Sergeant Miller, and this is the story of how a routine recon mission turned into a descent into a darkness that still haunts my waking hours. The hum of the MATV's engine was a monotonous drone against the rising sun, a mechanical heartbeat pushing us deeper into the wilderness. The road, if you could even call it that, was little more than a scarred dirt track, winding its way through a dense canopy of ancient oaks and pines. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick foliage, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of pine needles, damp soil, and something else, something subtly metallic, like old blood. "Another mile, Miller," Corporal Davies' voice crackled over the comms, his tone flat, professional. Davies was our comms specialist, a wiry man with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, usually. Today, even his usual banter was muted. He sat hunched over his console, a map of the region spread out before him, the coordinates for Blackwood Creek, a stark red dot in a sea of green. "Copy that, Davies," I replied, my gaze sweeping the tree line. My M4 rested across my lap, its weight a familiar comfort. My squad, a 4-man recon unit, was on a routine mission: investigate reports of unusual activity in an abandoned mining town. The official brief was vague: potential squatters, illicit operations, or environmental hazards. The unofficial brief, whispered between the grunts, was far more colorful: local legends, ghost sightings, and a town that just disappeared. Behind me, Private Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was fresh out of basic, all wide-eyed enthusiasm and nervous energy. This was his first deep country deployment, and the isolation was clearly getting to him. "You really think there are ghosts, Sarge?" he mumbled, his voice barely audible above the engine. I glanced back, catching his reflection in the rearview mirror. His knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle. "Jenkins, we're here to find out what's causing the reports. Could be anything. Bears, moonshiners, kids playing pranks. Keep your head on a swivel." I kept my voice even, projecting a calm I didn't entirely feel. The truth was, the local liaison had been unusually insistent, his eyes darting nervously when he spoke of Blackwood Creek. He'd mentioned the old ways and things best left undisturbed. Next to Jenkins, Private Riley, our medic, or Doc as we called him, remained silent. Doc was a quiet man, older than Jenkins, with a thoughtful demeanor and an uncanny ability to read people. He was meticulously checking the contents of his medical kit, his movements precise and unhurried. He didn't believe in ghosts, not in the traditional sense, but he believed in the power of suggestion and the human mind's capacity for terror. He'd seen enough of it in the field. "Approaching designated drop-off point, Sarge," Davies announced, pulling me back to the present. The trees began to thin, revealing a narrow, overgrown clearing. Beyond it, a skeletal silhouette of structures clawed at the sky: Blackwood Creek. From this distance, it looked like a forgotten diorama, frozen in time. We dismounted, the crunch of our boots on dry leaves and twigs unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. The MATV idled for a moment, then Davies killed the engine. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence itself. "All right, listen up," I said, my voice low. "Standard recon formation. Jenkins, you're on point. Davies, keep an eye on our 6. Doc, stay central. We move slow, we move quiet. Any movement, any sound that isn't us, you call it out. No heroics. We're observing, not engaging. Understand?" "Yes, Sarge," came the synchronized replies. Though Jenkins was a beat slower, his eyes already scanning the decaying buildings ahead. As we advanced, the air grew colder, despite the lingering warmth of the morning Sunday. A faint, acrid smell began to permeate the pine-scented air, something like burnt wood and stagnant water, mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness. The first building we approached was a dilapidated general store, its windows shattered, gaping like empty eye sockets. A faded sign, barely legible, read, "Blackwood Creek Mercantile." Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the broken roof. Shelves were still lined with rusted cans and bottles, their labels long since faded into illegibility. A counter stood in the center, a ledger lying open, its pages brittle and yellowed. It looked as if the owner had simply walked away mid-transaction, never to return. It was unsettling. This sudden abandonment, this snapshot of a life abruptly halted. "No signs of recent entry, Sarge," Davies reported, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating cobweb-draped corners. "Dust layers are undisturbed. This place has been empty for decades." "Decades?" Jenkins whispered, his voice tight. "But everything's still here." He was right. It wasn't just empty, it was preserved. A child's toy lay discarded in an aisle, a wooden doll with one button eye missing, staring blankly at the ceiling. A half-eaten meal sat on a full table in what looked like a back room, the plate covered in a thick layer of dust, the food long since petrified. It was a tableau of sudden, inexplicable departure. "Doc, anything you can tell from this?" I asked, gesturing to the petrified meal. Doc knelt, examining it with a detached, clinical interest. He carefully scraped a sample into a sterile bag. "Hard to say without analysis, Sarge. But it's odd. No signs of struggle, no forced entry anywhere. Just gone. Like everyone just vanished." His voice was low, thoughtful. "The air quality is also peculiar. There's a faint, almost imperceptible hum, low frequency, and the temperature fluctuations are significant, even indoors." We moved deeper into the town, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The houses were mostly small, wooden structures, built for miners and their families. Each one told the same story: lives interrupted, belongings left behind, a child's drawing still tacked to a wall, a woman's dress hanging on a hook, a man's tools laid out on a workbench. It was a ghost town, yes, but not in the way we understood it. It felt less like a place where people had died, and more like a place where they had simply ceased to be. Jenkins, ever the most jumpy, suddenly froze. "Sarge, did you hear that?" I held up a hand, signaling for silence. We all stopped, listening. The wind rustled through the skeletal trees, a mournful sigh. A loose shutter somewhere creaked rhythmically. Nothing else. "Hear what, Jenkins?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A whisper," he insisted, his eyes wide, darting around. "Sounded like my name." Davies scoffed softly. "Just the wind, kid. Your imagination's running wild." But I saw Doc's eyes narrow, his head cocked slightly, as if straining to hear something beyond the normal range of human perception. He didn't say anything, but his silence was more unsettling than Jenkins' outburst. I knew Doc. He didn't spook easily. We continued our patrol, the unease growing with every step. The town felt like a stage set, waiting for actors who would never arrive. Or perhaps actors who were still here, just unseen. The sun, now higher in the sky, still struggled to break through the canopy, and the shadows in Blackwood Creek seemed to deepen, to lengthen, to twist into unnatural shapes. The metallic scent grew stronger, almost sweet now, like decaying flowers. Then Davies' voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the comms. "Sarge, I'm losing signal. My primary and secondary comms are both showing heavy interference. It's not just static, it's a complete blackout." My blood ran cold. Losing comms was bad. Losing comms this deep in the Appalachians, in a place already steeped in unsettling silence, was a nightmare. "Try to re-establish, Davies. Use the emergency frequency." "Already on it, Sarge." "Nothing. It's like we're in a Faraday cage. Or something's actively jamming us." His voice was strained, a hint of genuine fear creeping in. Davies, the logical one, was starting to crack. We were cut off. The realization settled over us like a shroud. No contact with command, no backup, just us and Blackwood Creek. And whatever it was that had made this town disappear, Jenkins was practically vibrating with fear now. We should go back, Sarge. This isn't right. This isn't just squatters. We complete the mission, Jenkins, I said, my voice firm, though I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. We find out what's here, and we report back. That's our job. But even as I said it, I knew the words sounded hollow. Our job was to observe and report. But what if what was here defied observation? What if it defied explanation? Doc, who had been quiet for a long time, finally spoke. Sarge, I'm picking up something, a thermal anomaly. Very faint, but it's there. Moving, not animal. 2. Diffuse. He pointed his thermal imager towards a cluster of dilapidated shacks. The screen showed a faint, shimmering outline, like heat haze, but without a discernible source. What is it? I asked, my hand instinctively going to my sidearm. Doc shook his head, his brow furrowed. I don't know, Sarge, but it's not on the visible spectrum, and it's getting closer. The silence deepened once more, but this time it was different. It was no longer just the absence of sound. It was a palpable weight, a pressure on our eardrums, a suffocating blanket. The air grew colder still, and the sweet metallic scent intensified, making my stomach churn. We were no longer alone in Blackwood Creek, and whatever was with us, it wasn't friendly. It was watching, waiting, and it had just begun to play. The thermal anomaly Doc detected vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the lingering chill and the heavy silence. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, weapons raised, eyes straining against the deepening shadows. Jenkins was breathing heavily, his fear a palpable thing in the air. Davies was frantically tapping at his comms unit, a desperate look on his face. Doc, ever the calm one, kept his thermal imager pointed at the spot where the anomaly had been, his expression a mixture of curiosity and profound unease. Anything, Davies? I finally broke the silence, my voice hoarse. He shook his head, frustration etched on his features. Nothing, Sarge. It's like the air itself is eating the signal. I've never seen anything like it. Not even in the deepest canyons. All right, I said, lowering my rifle slightly but not relaxing. New objective, find higher ground. Maybe we can punch through whatever's blocking us. It was a desperate hope, but it was all we had. We couldn't stay cut off, not here. We moved cautiously, our formation tighter now, our senses on high alert. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt through us. The town felt different now, more alive, more predatory. The abandoned buildings seemed to watch us with their empty windows, their broken doors like mouths agape. The metallic, sweet scent was stronger, almost sickening, and I could taste it on the back of my tongue. As we passed what looked like an old church, its steeple leaning precariously, Jenkins let out a strangled cry. We spun around, rifles snapping up. He was pointing a trembling finger at the church's stained glass window, or what was left of it. Did you see that? A face, in the window. We stared. The window was dark, reflecting only the dim light of the overcast sky. There was nothing there. Jenkins, there's nothing, Davies said, his voice strained, trying to sound reassuring. No, I swear, a woman's face, pale with black eyes. Jenkins was shaking, his face ashen. He wasn't faking it. The kid was genuinely terrified. It's just shadows, son. I tried to calm him, but even as I spoke, a shiver ran down my spine. The competitor's script had taught me that sometimes the things you think you see are just as effective as the things you actually see. Doc stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the church. The temperature just dropped significantly inside that building, Sarge, and the low-frequency hum, it's emanating from there. My eyes met Doc's. He wasn't prone to exaggeration. If he said something was there, something was there. All right, Davies, Jenkins, cover us. Doc and I are going to take a quick look. Sarge, no, Jenkins protested, his voice cracking. Don't go in there. Stay put, Private, I ordered, my tone leaving no room for argument. I exchanged a glance with Doc, Then we moved towards the church's heavy wooden doors. They hung ajar, groaning softly in the breeze. The air inside was frigid, instantly chilling us to the bone. Even through our gear, the sweet metallic smell was overwhelming here, like standing in a slaughterhouse filled with lilies. The interior was a wreck. Pews were overturned, hymnals scattered across the dusty floor. The altar was desecrated, a crude, dark stain marring its surface. But it was the silence that was most profound, a silence that seemed to absorb all sound, even our own breathing. It was a hungry silence. "Look," Doc whispered, pointing his flashlight beam towards a corner. There, half hidden beneath a pile of rubble, was a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, my gloved fingers tracing the faded script on the cover. Reverend Elias Thorne, Blackwood Creek Parish. I flipped it open. The handwriting was spidery, frantic in places. The entries started normally enough, detailing church activities, local gossip. But then, the tone shifted. Mentions of the whispers in the mines, the dark earth's hunger, and the sacrifices required to appease it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a ghost town. This was a place of worship for something ancient and terrible. "Sarge, you need to see this," Doc said, his voice tight. He was shining his light on the wall behind the altar. Scrawled in what looked like dried blood were symbols I didn't recognize, intricate and disturbing, surrounding a crude drawing of a figure with elongated limbs and a gaping maw. Just then, a guttural moan echoed from the depths of the church, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. It wasn't human. It was something ancient, something in pain, or perhaps something anticipating pain. Our pain. "Out!" I yelled, shoving the journal into my pack. "Now!" We burst out of the church, gasping for breath, into the relative safety of the outside. Jenkins and Davies were already aiming their rifles at the church doors, their faces pale. "What was that, Sarge?" Davies demanded, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart hammering against my ribs. "But it's not friendly, and it's not a ghost." I pulled the journal from my pack. This might explain some things. This town wasn't abandoned, it was consumed. We decided to push for higher ground, a small ridge overlooking the town that Davies had identified on his map. The hope was that we could re-establish comms there, or at least get a clearer picture of what we were dealing with. The climb was arduous, the terrain steep and unforgiving. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snapping twig, made us jump. The feeling of being watched was constant, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. As we ascended, the air grew thinner, but the oppressive atmosphere of Blackwood Creek seemed to follow us, clinging to our boots, whispering in our ears. Jenkins was on the verge of a breakdown, muttering to himself, seeing things in the shadows. Davies, usually so composed, was jumpy, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Even Doc, with his stoic demeanor, was visibly shaken, his hand constantly on his sidearm. We reached the ridge just as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Below us, Blackwood Creek lay shrouded in an unnatural gloom, the shadows stretching long and distorted, like grasping fingers. It looked less like a town and more like a gaping wound in the earth. From this vantage point, I could see the extent of the abandonment. Dozens of structures, all silent, all empty, but not truly empty. I felt it in my gut. Something was stirring down there. Davies immediately set up his comms gear, frantically trying to get a signal. He cycled through frequencies, adjusted antennas, but all he got was static, a low, guttural hiss that seemed to mock his efforts. "It's no good, Sarge," he finally said, defeated. "Still nothing. We're completely isolated." The last vestiges of hope flickered and died. We were alone, and whatever was in Blackwood Creek, it knew we were here. It had been waiting for us. As darkness began to fall, the temperature plummeted. A thick, unnatural fog began to roll in from the valley below, slowly engulfing the town, then creeping up the ridge towards us. It wasn't a normal fog. It was too dense, too cold, and it carried with it that cloying, metallic scent. It felt alive, Jenkins let out a whimper. "Sarge, look!" He pointed a trembling finger towards the town below. Through the swirling mist, faint lights began to appear in the windows of the abandoned houses. Not electric lights, but a soft, flickering glow, like candlelight. And then, shapes. Figures moving within the fog, indistinct, ethereal, but undeniably there. They weren't walking, they were gliding, drifting through the streets of Blackwood Creek. "Are those ghosts?" Davies whispered, his voice barely audible. His face was pale in the fading light, his eyes wide with terror. I gripped my rifle tighter. "I don't know, Davies, but they're not friendly." The journal in my pack felt heavy, a lead weight against my back. The Reverend's frantic words echoed in my mind, the sacrifices required to appease it. What had happened here? What kind of entity demanded such a price? Doc, ever the pragmatist, was scanning the figures with his thermal imager. "No thermal signature, Sarge. Nothing. They're cold, colder than the air itself." His voice was laced with a fear I hadn't heard from him before. "But they're moving with purpose, they're converging." My eyes followed his gaze. The flickering lights, the drifting figures. They were indeed moving, slowly but inexorably, towards the base of the ridge. Towards us, the fog thickened, swallowing the last of the daylight, plunging Blackwood Creek into an inky blackness, broken only by those eerie, flickering lights. The low-frequency hum that Doc had detected earlier was now a distinct vibration in the ground beneath our feet, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to come from the very earth itself. "Set up a perimeter!" I barked, trying to inject some authority into my voice to cut through the rising panic. "Jenkins, cover the left flank. Davies, right. Doc, stay with me." We scrambled into defensive positions, our rifles pointed into the swirling, luminous fog. The air was now heavy with the metallic sweetness and a new smell, something ancient and earthy, like disturbed grave soil. The whispers started then, faint at first, carried on the unnatural breeze, then growing louder, more distinct. They weren't in English, or any language I recognized. They were guttural, hissing, a chorus of malevolent intent. Jenkins let out a choked cry. "Sarge, they're here, in the fog!" Through the swirling mist, a figure emerged, closer than any of the others. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It moved with a jerky, disjointed gait, like a marionette with tangled strings. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were twin points of obsidian blackness, reflecting no light, only absorbing it. And it was holding something, a small wooden doll, with one button eye missing. My blood ran cold. It was the doll from the general store, the one Jenkins had seen. How could it be here? How could it be here? This wasn't a ghost. This was something else entirely. Something that could move objects, something that could manifest, something that knew our fears. And it was just the first of them. Behind it, more shapes began to coalesce in the fog, their numbers growing, their whispers rising to a chilling crescendo. We were surrounded, and the night had just begun. The figures in the fog were not spectral, not translucent. They were solid, yet moved with an unsettling fluidity. Their forms distorted, their movements jerky and unnatural. The one holding the doll glided closer, its head cocked as if studying us. Its black eyes seemed to bore into Jenkins, who had frozen, his rifle shaking uncontrollably. The whispers intensified, weaving in and out of each other, forming a cacophony of ancient, guttural sounds that clawed at the edges of my sanity. "Fire!" I roared, breaking the spell of terror. My M4 spat fire, the muzzle flash, momentarily illuminating the grotesque figure. The round struck it with sickening thuds, but there was no blood, no scream. The figure merely shuddered, its head snapping back, then slowly, deliberately returned to its original position. It was unfazed, unharmed. Davies and Jenkins opened fire, their rounds tearing through the fog, but with the same futile results. The figures kept coming, their numbers growing, their silent advance relentless. Doc, ever the quick thinker, grabbed a flare from his pack and ignited it, sending a blinding burst of light into the swirling mist. For a moment, the figures recoiled, their forms momentarily visible in the harsh glare, revealing skin like dried leather stretched over bone, mouths agape in silent screams, eyes that were empty pits of despair. "They don't like the light!" Doc yelled over the din of gunfire and whispers. "Concentrate fire on the ones closest to the flare." We poured rounds into the advancing horde, the flare providing a temporary reprieve, pushing them back into the deeper shadows. But it was a losing battle. There were too many of them, and our ammunition was finite, and they were learning. The figures began to flank us, moving with surprising speed through the dense fog, their whispers now laced with a chilling, almost playful malice. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, a low, mournful wail like a child crying, but distorted, stretched into something inhuman. It came from directly behind Jenkins. He spun around, his eyes wide with terror, and fired wildly into the fog. "My sister, I hear my sister!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Jenkins, hold your fire, there's nothing there!" I yelled, but it was too late. He was lost in a waking nightmare, firing at phantoms only he could see. The wailing intensified, twisting into a mocking laugh, and then a figure materialized directly in front of him, its face a grotesque parody of his sister's, its eyes black and empty. Jenkins let out a final guttural scream before he was enveloped by the fog, dragged down into the darkness. His rifle clattered to the ground, its magazine empty. "Jenkins!" Davies cried, but I pulled him back. "Too late, Davies! Fall back! Fall back to the rock formation!" We retreated, covering each other, the figures pressing in, their whispers now a chorus of triumphant malice. The rock formation offered some cover, a natural barricade against the encroaching horror. We huddled together, our backs to the cold stone, our breathing ragged. The fog swirled around us, illuminated by the flickering lights of the town below and the occasional muzzle flash of our rifles. "They're playing with us," Doc said, his voice grim, reloading his sidearm with trembling hands. "They're not just trying to kill us, they're trying to break us." He was right. The wailing, the visions, they were tailored to our deepest fears. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. What would they show me? What trauma would they dredge up from my past? The thought was more terrifying than any physical threat. I pulled the Reverend Thorne's journal from my pack, my fingers fumbling with the brittle pages. "We need to understand what this island, what happened here." I began to read aloud, my voice low, trying to cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "The 17th of October, 1923. The whispers grow louder. The earth demands its due. The miners, they hear it too, the song of the deep places. It promises riches, but it asks for more. Elias, forgive me, but the congregation is swayed. They see the prosperity, the coal flowing like black gold. They do not see the price, the 5th of November, 1923. The first sacrifice, young Thomas. They said it was a mining accident, a cave-in. But I saw the marks, the ritualistic carvings on the rock face, the blood. It was not an accident, it was an offering. And the earth? It accepted. The 1st of December, 1923. The town thrives. The coal output is unprecedented. But the people, they change. Their eyes are hollow. They speak in hushed tones of the benefactor. They bring their children to the mines, not to work, but to witness. I fear for my soul. I fear for Blackwood Creek. The benefactor is not God. The 12th of January, 1924. The benefactor has revealed itself. Not a spirit, not a demon, but something. It dwells beneath the earth, a consciousness woven into the very fabric of this mountain. It feeds on fear, on despair, on sacrifice. It grants prosperity, but it demands absolute devotion, and it is growing stronger. The town is its temple, the mines its maw. The 20th of February, 1924. They came for me. They know I resist. They showed me my sins, my failures, my deepest regrets. They twisted them into grotesque visions. I saw my wife dead in childbirth, her eyes accusing me. I saw my son lost to the influenza, his small hand reaching for me. They want me to break. They want me to join them. But I will not. I will not give them my soul. I will write this down so that if anyone ever finds it, they will know. Blackwood Creek is not just a town, it is a tomb. And the dead, they are merely waiting. The last entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared, as if the Reverend had been interrupted. I looked up from the journal, my eyes meeting Davies and Doc's. Their faces were grim, reflecting the horror of the words. "A primordial entity," Davies whispered, his voice hoarse. "It feeds on fear and sacrifice. And it's still here." "The people of Blackwood Creek," Doc added, his gaze sweeping over the swirling fog. "They weren't just victims, they were its thralls, its congregation. And now, we're the new offering." The whispers around us grew louder, more insistent, no longer just a cacophony, but a chorus of distinct voices, each one a distorted echo of our own thoughts, our own fears. I heard my own name, spoken in my mother's voice, then my father's, then the voices of fallen comrades accusing me of their deaths. It was a targeted assault, a psychological barrage designed to shatter our resolve. Davies suddenly cried out, clutching his head. "My daughter, she's drowning, I can't save her." He thrashed against the rock, his eyes wide with a terror that wasn't entirely of this world. He was seeing his worst nightmare, brought to life by the entity. "Davies, it's not real, fight it!" I yelled, grabbing his shoulders, trying to shake him out of the trance. But his eyes were unfocused, staring at something only he could perceive. The figures in the fog seemed to draw closer, their whispers coalescing into a single resonant hum that vibrated through the ground, through our very bones. Doc, ever the medic, quickly injected Davies with a sedative, hoping to break the psychological hold. Davies slumped against the rock, unconscious, his breathing shallow. "It's too strong, Sarge," Doc said, his voice strained. "It's getting inside our heads. We need to get out of here. Now." But how? We were surrounded, cut off, and now one of us was incapacitated. The fog pressed in, thick and suffocating, and the flickering lights of the town below seemed to pulse with a malevolent rhythm. The low-frequency hum was now a roar in my ears, and I could feel the earth itself vibrating, a deep, resonant thrum that spoke of ancient power. "The mines," I said, a sudden, chilling realization dawning on me. The Reverend wrote about the whispers in the mines. The earth's hunger. That's where it lives. That's its maw. Doc's eyes widened. "You think, if we go into the mines we can confront it, or escape it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But staying here is a death sentence. If it feeds on fear, maybe we can starve it, or at least find a way to fight back on its own turf." It was a desperate gamble, a plunge into the heart of darkness, but it was the only option left. The alternative was to succumb to the psychological torture and be consumed, just like the people of Blackwood Creek. We secured Davies, making sure he wouldn't be easily moved, and began our descent towards the mines, guided by the flickering lights and the increasingly deafening hum. The fog parted for us, almost as if inviting us in, revealing the gaping maw of the main mine shaft, its entrance dark and foreboding. The metallic sweet scent was overpowering now, mixed with the damp, earthy smell of the deep places. This was it, the heart of Blackwood Creek's horror, and we were walking right into it. The mine entrance was a black void, a jagged wound in the side of the mountain. The air that spilled out was heavy, cold, and thick with the scent of damp rock, sulfur, and that cloying sweetness that now made my stomach clench. The low-frequency hum was deafening here, vibrating through the soles of my boots, making my teeth ache. It felt less like a sound and more like a physical presence, a monstrous heartbeat echoing from the Earth's core. "Lights on," I ordered, my voice barely a whisper against the thrum. Our tactical flashlights cut through the absolute darkness, revealing a narrow, timber-lined tunnel stretching into the abyss. The wooden supports were ancient, groaning under the immense weight of the mountain, their surfaces slick with moisture and something else. a dark, viscous residue that shimmered faintly in our beams. Doc, his face pale but resolute, checked. His medical kit, one last time. Davies is stable for now, Sarge, but he won't be waking up anytime soon. We need to be quick. Understood, I replied, my gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. Stay sharp, Doc. We don't know what's down here. We moved into the mine, the entrance quickly disappearing behind us as the tunnel curved. The air grew heavier, the pressure building in my ears. The whispers, which had receded slightly when we entered, now returned, faint at first, then growing in intensity, echoing off the damp rock walls. They were no longer just a cacophony. They seemed to coalesce, forming fragmented words, insidious suggestions that preyed on my deepest insecurities. You failed them, Miller. All of them, just like you'll fail him. The voice was my own, yet distorted, laced with venom. I clenched my jaw, pushing the thought away. This was its game, psychological warfare. I had to stay focused. Sarge, look, Doc whispered, pointing his light to the tunnel floor. Strewn across the damp earth were old mining tools, rusted picks and shovels, but also something far more disturbing. Crude, hand-carved effigies, small wooden figures with distorted faces and empty eye sockets, similar to the doll the entity had been holding. They were arranged in unsettling patterns, some impaled on sharp stones, others covered in that same dark, viscous residue. Ritualistic, Doc murmured, his medical training giving way to a more primal understanding. This isn't just a mine, it's a temple. We pressed on, the tunnel branching off into a labyrinth of smaller passages. The air grew warmer, strangely, and the metallic sweetness became almost unbearable, like rotten fruit. The walls began to shimmer, not with moisture, but with a faint, bioluminescent glow, revealing intricate carvings etched into the rock face. They depicted scenes of sacrifice, of figures bowing before a colossal, amorphous entity, its form shifting, its tendrils reaching out to embrace the supplicants. The faces of the worshippers were ecstatic, terrified, and utterly devoid of self. This is what Reverend Thorne was writing about, I said, my voice hollow. The benefactor, this thing, it's been here for centuries, maybe millennia, feeding. Suddenly, the tunnel ahead opened into a vast cavern. Our lights struggled to penetrate the immense space, but what they did reveal made my blood run cold. The cavern was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor a chaotic landscape of jagged rock formations and deep fissures. And in the center, pulsating with that low-frequency hum, was a colossal, organic mass. It was dark, glistening, covered in a network of pulsating veins and tendrils that snaked across the cavern floor, disappearing into the surrounding rock. It was the source, the heart of Blackwood Creek's horror, the benefactor. The air in the cavern was thick with the sweet metallic scent, now so potent it burned my nostrils. The whispers here were a roaring chorus, 1,000 voices screaming in my head, each one dredging up a different memory, a different regret. I saw my fallen comrades, their faces contorted in agony, their eyes accusing me. I saw my own mistakes, my moments of weakness, magnified and twisted into unbearable guilt. Doc, too, was struggling. He clutched his head, his eyes squeezed shut, muttering incoherently. No, not real. It's not real. Doc, fight it, I yelled, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back from the brink. But the entity's psychological assault was overwhelming. It was feeding on our fear, our despair, growing stronger with every moment we spent in its presence. I looked at the colossal mass, its tendrils twitching, its surface rippling. It wasn't just a physical entity. It was a psychic predator, a consciousness woven into the very fabric of this mountain, feeding on the emotional and spiritual energy of anything that entered its domain. The town above, Blackwood Creek, was merely its lure, its trap. Then, a new vision slammed into my mind, clearer, more potent than the others. I saw the townspeople, not as victims but as willing participants. Their faces, once terrified, now bore expressions of serene devotion as they offered their children, their loved ones, to the gaping fissures in the cavern floor. The entity had promised them prosperity, and they had paid the ultimate price, willingly. They hadn't just disappeared, they had been absorbed, their consciousnesses becoming part of the benefactor, their whispers now part of its chorus. This wasn't a ghost town. It was a living, breathing, consuming organism, and we were its next meal. "We can't fight it directly," I gasped, the words tearing through the mental static. "It's too big, too ancient." Doc, still struggling, managed to focus his eyes on the entity. It's a parasitic consciousness, Sarge. It draws energy from fear, from life force. If we can disrupt its connection, its anchors." His words sparked a desperate idea. The effigies, the carvings, the rituals. They weren't just symbolic, they were conduits, anchors that bound the entity to this physical plane, allowing it to manifest and feed. If we could destroy them, perhaps we could sever its connection, weaken it, or at least buy ourselves enough time to escape. "The effigies!" I shouted, pointing towards a cluster of them near the cavern wall. "They're its anchors! Destroy them!" Doc, shaking off the last vestiges of the psychic attack, understood immediately. He pulled out his combat knife, his eyes blazing with a renewed determination. We moved towards the effigies, the entity's whispers intensifying, its tendrils lashing out, trying to impede our progress. The ground beneath us began to tremble violently, rocks raining down from the cavern ceiling. I raised my M4, firing at the pulsating tendrils that snaked towards us. The rounds tore through the organic matter, eliciting a guttural shriek from the entity, a sound that was both physical and psychic, a scream of pure agony that reverberated through the cavern. It was vulnerable. It could be hurt. Doc reached the first cluster of effigies, hacking at them with his knife. The moment the blade connected, a jolt of dark energy erupted from the effigy, throwing Doc back against the cavern wall. He cried out, clutching his arm. But the effigy shattered, dissolving into a cloud of black dust. The entity shrieked again, its tendrils recoiling, its pulsating mass momentarily shrinking. "It works!" Doc yelled, pushing himself up, his arm bleeding but his spirit unbroken. "Keep going, Sarge!" I joined him, using the butt of my rifle to smash the wooden figures. Each shattered effigy sent a wave of psychic pain through the cavern, and the entity's roars grew louder, more desperate. The whispers in my head began to falter, replaced by a raw, primal scream of rage and fear. It was losing its grip, but it wasn't going down without a fight. The ground convulsed violently, opening new fissures, spewing forth clouds of noxious gas. More figures, darker, more grotesque than the ones above ground, began to emerge from the shadows, their forms coalescing from the very rock itself. They were the absorbed, the thralls, the ancient congregation, now roused to defend their benefactor. We were surrounded again, but this time, we had a weapon. We had a target. "Focus fire on the effigies," I commanded, emptying a magazine into a group of approaching thralls, buying Doc precious seconds. He moved with a grim efficiency, smashing effigy after effigy, each one a small victory against the encroaching darkness. The cavern was a maelstrom of sound and fury. The entity's screams, the thrall's guttural growls, the crash of falling rock, the crack of our rifles. We were fighting for our lives, for our sanity, against an enemy that defied all logic and reason. This wasn't a war. It was an exorcism, a desperate attempt to sever a parasitic consciousness from its ancient host. Finally, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, Doc smashed the last effigy. A blinding flash of dark energy erupted from the cavern floor, followed by a deafening roar that shook the entire mountain. The colossal mass in the center of the cavern convulsed violently, its tendrils thrashing, then began to recede, dissolving into a black, viscous goo that seeped into the fissures. The thralls, caught in the backlash, disintegrated into dust, their forms scattering like ashes in the wind. The low-frequency hum died, replaced by an eerie, profound silence. The bioluminescent glow on the walls faded, plunging the cavern into absolute darkness. We stood there, panting, covered in dust and sweat, our ears ringing, our minds reeling. It was over. Or was it? "Doc?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. reaching out into the darkness. "Are you there?" "Here, Sarge," his voice replied, weak but steady. I think we did it." We found each other in the darkness, our hands clasping, a silent acknowledgement of the horror we had faced and survived. But the silence was not empty. It was filled with the echoes of screams, the whispers of the dead, and the lingering scent of sulfur and sweet decay. The entity was gone, but its presence, its memory, was etched into the very fabric of this place and into our souls. We made our way back through the labyrinthine tunnels, the journey feeling infinitely longer than our descent. The air was still heavy, but the oppressive psychic weight was gone. The whispers were silent. The carvings on the walls seemed less menacing, more like ancient warnings. We emerged from the mine entrance into the pre-dawn gloom, the world outside feeling alien and unreal after the horrors we had witnessed. Davies was still unconscious, exactly where we had left him. We carefully moved him, checking his vitals. He was alive but deeply traumatized, his face still etched with the terror of his hallucination. We knew he would never be the same. None of us would. We began the long, arduous trek back to civilization, carrying Davies between us. The sun eventually rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, but its warmth felt distant, unreal. Blackwood Creek lay behind us, shrouded in a perpetual mist, its secrets once again swallowed by the Appalachian mountains. We didn't look back. We couldn't. It's been 3 years. 3 years of therapy, of nightmares, of trying to forget the things we saw, the things we felt, the things that whispered in our minds. Jenkins, he was never found. Officially, he's listed as MIA. Unofficially, I know he was consumed, his essence added to the benefactor's chorus. Davies eventually recovered physically, but his mind, he never truly came back. He spends his days staring blankly, sometimes muttering about a drowning child. Doc and I are the only ones left, the only ones who truly know what happened in Blackwood Creek. We filed our report, a heavily redacted version that spoke of unforeseen environmental hazards and psychological distress due to extreme isolation. They didn't believe us, not really. How could they? How could anyone believe in a primordial entity that feeds on fear and sacrifice, a consciousness woven into the very fabric of a mountain? But I know, Doc knows, and sometimes late at night, when the world is silent, I can still hear the faint hum, the distant whispers carried on the wind from the direction of the Appalachians. I know it's still there, dormant, waiting for the next unsuspecting souls to stumble into its maw, waiting for Blackwood Creek to awaken once more. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that our squad found more than ghosts in that Appalachian ghost town. We found something that defies definition, something that defies death, something that will forever haunt the deepest recesses of our minds. And it's still out there, always waiting,